Hey guys, my name is Jonathan Brown, and I am in Music History 2. And this podcast is for week 4. I chose my project to be on Dr. Dre's album, The Chronic 2001. And I hope to be an aspiring engineer in my industry and also a producer as well. I think the biggest influence that this album has actually had on pop culture or pop music is that the amount of time it actually takes to produce a good album, and not just a good album, actually a great album. Dr. Dre, when he released his first album, The Chronic, that came out in 1992. And by the time he came out with the next album, which is the album I'm speaking about, Chronic 2001, it was actually released in 1999. And that 7 year time frame actually allowed him to produce and perfect to his liking before it was actually released. And I think that trend started to happen to realize that taking your instrumentals or your beats or whatever it is you're producing, actually taking the time to actually polish your music and then releasing it, I think that was one of the biggest influence from this album. One of the major influences that this album has had on the musical industry is just its production and as a whole. Kanye West actually made an album called The College Dropout, and on the one of his tracks is, I think it was called Last Call. In the last 5 minutes, he's referring to Dre's album, The Chronic, and he said that when he was listening to it, he just really liked the drum so much that he bit it. And for those who do not know what biting is, that's pretty much copying ultimately. And I just thought about that, and it just really thought, like, how much influence did it have on Kanye West, who's also another great producer. Also, Kid Cudi, I just read in an article, Kid Cudi is actually making a third album that is based on The Chronic and how the production is. So after 10 years plus 12 years, it's still an inspiring album. I really think that this album should be studied only because of how well it's put together. Not just for its drums, because that's just amazing in itself, but just how this album has actually progressed. There's 22 tracks on this album. From tracks 1 through 12, and this is my opinion, from 1 through 12 is just Dre's reintroduction to the hip hop scene at the time. He was on a 7 year hiatus, so he hasn't been around. He's been making music for other people, but not himself. So I just think that that's his personal album, and then the rest of the 10 tracks are actually his production and his production skills. You don't really hear him on a lot of the tracks towards the end, and I think that's just because he's showing off his production skills. So as far as the album, how it's being made, I really think that people should study it because it's just well put together. It just people are just putting out albums just to put out albums. He actually took the time to make sure that it was perfect in his eyes. I think that this album really hits home, which is part of the reason why I chose it, because I grew up listening to this album, and I actually listened to Dr. Dre's first album, The Chronic, in 1992, and I've heard his progression and I've heard most of his works, so it really baffles me that he can make such astonishing music and still have time to produce other artists. I think that this album is really a standard as far as making music for hip hop. Not necessarily any other genre, but for hip hop, this is a standard that most people should try to follow because the beats were well done. The production in it was just amazing. Mixing of the music, and it was just something that really, really needs to be acknowledged. And I aspire to be just like that as a industry professional. As I start to close out here, I start to realize that this really has been my standard all along, was Dr. Dre's method of taking your time to make things sound right, I guess you could say. Um, and in my life, I always try to make sure that whatever it is that I'm doing, that I'm happy in it, but I'm also making sure that I'm progressing at the same time. You can't progress unless you actually take the time and study whatever it is you're doing. You can fill in the blank, just making sure that you know what you're doing. And I feel as though this album has helped me realize it even more, that just taking your time can really accomplish a lot of things. You'll hear different things one day compared to another. And, as an engineer, as a producer, I really want to aspire to just being the best that I can be, and making sure that I know all of my work and my craft is up to par, at least for my own standards. So again, this has been a podcast on the album The Chronic 2001 by Dr. Dre.